Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and in Yirtzeh Hashem today we will be learning Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos B'tzias Hapas, the halachas that govern the beginning of the Suda after we have washed Netilas Yadayim, and now we want to make HaMotzi on the lechem. How precisely do we take the lechem, make the HaMotzi, cut the lechem, and then begin to eat? So we've already begun to learn these halachas. We pick up today, very bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch on Samach Beis, Amud Beis, Siman Kuf Samach Zayin Sif Gimel. Says the Mechaber, Ein levarech kaidem sheyitfais halechem. We should not make the bracha until we are holding the lechem. So don't leave your sandwich on the plate, make hamotzi, and then pick up the sandwich and start eating. Or if it's Shabbos, don't just look at the challah, make a bracha hamotzi lechem in the aretz, then take the challah to cut it and eat it. You're not supposed to make the bracha until you are actually holding the lechem. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Ois kat l'chav beis. Kaidim shegitfais. Don't make the bracha before you're holding the lechem. Why? Explains the Mishnah Berurah. She'ein bevarkin al hamitzvus. Because this is the great rule when it comes to a bracha. We don't make a bracha, let's say, on a mitzvah, Birchas HaMotzis. You want to go make an al netilas lulav on the dal and minim. You don't make the bracha ela samuch la'asiyasan. We always want to make the bracha as close to the performance of the mitzvah as possible, right? So when do you make al netilas lulav? You pick up the dal and minim. You already have them in your hand. You just flip the esrog over so that you're not yoytze the mitzvah, and then you make the bracha, then you flip the esrog over. When do we make a bracha on tefillin? We make the bracha on tefillin when the shalyad is already positioned on your arm and you're about to tighten it. You don't make the bracha on tefillin when the tefillin are sitting on the table and then take the tefillin and put them on, because that would not be samach la'asiyasan. That's not immediately prior to the performance of the mitzvah. So too here, when it comes to eating the lechem, says the Mishnah Berurah, you make the Birchas HaMitzvah samach la'asiyasan, very close as possible to the performance of the mitzvah, kisha mitzvah biyadai la'asaisa, when the mitzvah is already in your hand so that you're able to perform it. V'loi kaidem l'chein, you don't make the bracha before that. So too over here with the hamotzi, we want you to make the bracha hamotzi lechem in the aretz when you're already holding the bread. So you're ready to go ahead and eat it. We don't want you to make the bracha when you're not even holding it yet. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, ub'di'eved, in birech v'achakach netaloi b'yadai, if b'di'eved you did make the bracha before you actually picked it up, gam kein ein tzarich lachzor levarich, you don't have to make the bracha over again. Ukid l'kabam b'simin reish vav sif hey, ayin sham u'v'mishnah Berurah. Okay, last word here on Samach Beis, Amud Beis in the Mechaber, Siman Sif Daled. Very interesting. Yitain shtei yadav al hapas. You should place both of your hands on the bread, b'shas bracha. When you make a hamotzi, you should be holding the bread in both of your hands, which is interesting, because we're going to see that usually we say that when you make a bracha on food, you're supposed to be holding the food in your right hand. So you make a geshahakal niyah on a tea, you hold the tea in your right hand, and you make the shahakal and then you drink. Over here by pas, we're saying that you should hold the pas in both hands. Why? Explains the Mechaber. Sheyesh bahen eser etzbois, because between the two of your hands you have 10 fingers. Keneged eser mitzvahs hatluyos papas. The 10 fingers correspond to 10 mitzvahs that are involved in the preparation of bread. Okay, very interesting. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Bottom line on Samach Beis, Amud Beis, Mishnah Berurah is cut l'chav gimel. The Mechaber said, Yitain shtei yadav. You should put both of your hands on the pas. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu detoiv lasis kain. It is good to do this. It's obviously not ma'akiv. We're not going to say that if you didn't put both your hands on the pas, you have to make a new hamotzi. But it is good to have both hands on the pas when you make the bracha. And to see how much import we give to this idea, says the Chavetz Chaim, V'im hu lavush b'bata yodayim, if you happen to be wearing gloves when you make the bracha, nachayin sheyesireim b'shas habracha. It would be proper that you should remove the gloves when you make the bracha so that your fingers are actually in contact with the bread. Kasva akraidim the akraidim right. Kishayomer Hashem, when you say the Shem Hashem in the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem yagbia hakikar. You should lift up the bread that you're making the bracha on. Ubishabbos shebevarchen al shtayim, and on Shabbos when you make the bracha on 2 chalas on Lechem Mishnah, yagbia shtehem, you should lift both of them when you say the Shem Hashem. Ois Katan Chav Daled, the Mechaber told us the reason you should have 10 fingers on the bread when you make the bracha is because there are 10 mitzvahs that are involved in the production of bread. Ois Katan Chav Daled, a Teluyos Papas, 10 mitzvahs that are dependent upon bread. Ki eser mitzvahs adam oiseh, there are 10 mitzvahs that a person does, ad shelo yoichal perusas pas, in the development and in the manufacture of bread, there are 10 mitzvahs that you encounter along the way in the production of bread. And he brings this down from the Yerushalmi Seif Parakama Dechala. What are the 10 mitzvahs? B'shas hacharisha, when you go ahead and you plow the field, back in the day when they plowed the fields with animals. So right away you encounter a mitzvah loisaseh, loisachroish b'shara v'chamar yachtav. We have an isser of kalayim. You're not allowed to plow using a team of mixed animals, of let's say an ox and a donkey. So by refraining from doing that and by plowing the field, let's say with an ox train or with horses or with a earth-moving equipment, whatever the proper tractor, whatever exactly they use nowadays, you are, I'm going to use the word, you're being mekayim, but you're doing a malacha, you're doing work that requires you to refrain from transgressing this prohibition of loisach reish b'shar v'kamar yaktav. So that's mitzvah number 1. B'shas haziriyah, when you actually go in and plant the field, there's another mitzvah loisaseh, sadaqa loisizra kiloyim. Now you're involved in planting, and you're refraining from planting kilayim. So you're being mekayim, another mitzvah loisaseh. B'shas disha, when it's time to thresh, when you thresh the grain, they used to thresh using animals. And then there's a third loisaseh, loisachsoim shar b'dishay. If you use an animal to perform the threshing, you're not allowed to muzzle the animal, so you shouldn't eat from the food, from the produce that you're working on. So that's the third loisaseh. Then you have the matnei saniyim, when you harvest your produce in the field, once it finally grows, now you're mechuyev to give matnei saniyim. So you have leket, shikha, peya. Then you have to give truma gedola to the kohen, meiser rishon to the Levi, meiser sheni you have to bring to Yerushalayim and eat Yerushalayim, or on an off year you have to give meiser ani, and then challah, and then eventually when you make a dough, you have to be mafresh challah and give challah to the kohen. So here we had 10 mitzvahs. To go through them again, you have loisach reish b'shachamar v'chama yachtav, sadaqa loisizra kalayim, loisachsim shar b'dishay, leket, shikha, peya, truma, meiser rishon, meiser sheni, and challah. So connected those 10 mitzvahs, we lift up, we hold the bread with our 10 fingers. Okay, now let's go back into the Mechaber over here. The Mechaber continues along this vein and says the Mechaber, second line, ulekach, and for the same reason, since there are 10 mitzvahs involved in the production of bread, yesh eser tevois bebirkas HaMotzi. We have 10 words in the bracha of HaMotzi. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam HaMotzi lechem min haaretz. The eser tevois, and there are 10 words bepasuk in the pasuk in Tehillim, matzmiach chotzir labeheba. The Rabbeinu Shalom causes to sprout animal food for animals. And then the pasuk continues, ve'esev la'avodas ha'adam lahoitzi lechem min haaretz. So this pasuk in Tehillim, where David HaMelech is praising the Rabbeinu Shalom for supplying mankind and animal kind with its sustenance, we have 10 words in that pasuk that mentions lechem. We say 3 times in Ashrei, the pasuk, Eine chayil elecha yisaberu, va'ata noise lahem es achlam be'itoi. 10 words. What does the pasuk mean? Eine chayil elecha yisaberu, the eyes of all turn to you in hope. They all hope to you. Eine chayil elecha yisaberu, va'ata noise lahem, and you give to them as achlam be'itoi, their sustenance at the proper time. Ve'eser tevos, and we have 10 words. Bepasuk eretz chita usa'ira gefen ute'ena v'rimain eretz zeis sheven udvash. So the pasuk that delineates the term just flew out of my head. The shivas haminim, the 7 species of produce that Eretz Yisrael is praised for, which also has to do with our sustenance. That's also 10 words. And finally, the Mechaber says, Ve'eser tevois b'pasuk v'yiten lecha. We also have 10 psukim in, this week's parsha. We also have 10 psukim in the pasuk where Yitzchak Avinu gave the bracha to Yaakov Avinu. The pasuk says, V'yiten lecha ha'elokim mital hashamayim u'mishmane ha'aretz v'roiv dagon v'sirosh. Where Yitzchak Avinu gives a bracha to Yaakov Avinu, and he benches him that we should have mital hashamayim u'shmane ha'aretz, from the dew of the heavens and the fats of the land, v'roiv dagon v'sirosh, and plentiful grain and wine. Grain we use to make bread. So again, here we have 10 words in the pasuk, and that alludes to the 10 mitzvahs involved in the production of bread. Okay, now we go to Sif Hey, 4 lines down in the Mechaber. Says the Mechaber, a halacha that many are familiar with, but they don't know precisely what's behind it. Says the Mechaber, lo yivtza, you should not break the bread, ad sheyaviu lefanav melach or lifton, until they bring either salt or lifton. What's lifton? Says the Ramah in the parentheses, he brings down Rashi from Masechtas Brachos. Pirush Rashi, Mem Aleph Amud Beis, Dibra Maschel Ein Tu'unin Ayin Sham. This is in Masechtas Brachos. What's lifton? Kol davar hane'echal im hapas. Foods that are meant to be eaten as an accompaniment to bread. So this could be dips that you eat together with challah, but it doesn't have to be dips. There are also other types of foods that are typically eaten together with bread. So, lox. People take a piece of lox, they put it on bread. I rarely see anybody sit down with a fork and knife and slice some lox and eat lox like he's eating a piece of salmon. You take a piece of lox, you put it onto the bread. So that's the lalafes bayas apas. Dips fall into this category very simply, right? What do you do with dips? Most people by a Shabbos Suda, what they do with the dip is they eat the dip with the challah. So that's a davar lalafes bayas apas. It's something that comes as an accompaniment to bread. And the halacha that the Mechaber is telling us over here is, don't make a bracha and then just eat a plain piece of bread. You should make the bracha and you should eat the pas either with melach, with salt, or with a lifton, or with some other kind of food that is used as an accompaniment to bread in order to give the bread additional taste. Let's read it again from the beginning of Sif Hey. Lo yivtza, do not break the bread, ad sheyaviu lefanav melach or lifton, until they bring you either salt or a lifton. Pirush Rashi, kol davar hanechal im hapas. Lifton is something that's eaten as an accompaniment to the bread. Lelafes by prusas habetzia, so that you have either salt or a lifton in order to lelafes by prusas habetzia, something to eat the prusas habetzia, the piece of challah, the chash of a piece of challah that you made a bracha on. We want it to have a rich accompaniment. We want it to be matim. We want it to be tasty. Lechvaid habracha. Let's take a look over here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is Chav Hey. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Lo Yivtza. Okay, Umimela. See, the Mechaber does not mention the bracha. The Mechaber doesn't say anything about waiting to make the HaMotzi. The Mechaber says, do not break the bread. In other words, don't cut the bread and eat it before you have melach or lifton. But the Mechaber didn't say a word about the Birchas HaMotzi. Says the Chavetz Chaim and Chavei, Umimela, since you're going to wait to break the bread until you have either melach or lifton, tzarich lizarim elahaskel avarich habracha. So it goes without saying that you have to wait to make the bracha until you have melach or lifton. In other words, the Mechaber is not going to suggest to you that what you should do is you should make the Birchas HaMotzi and then wait to eat the Prusas HaBetzia until you get melach or lifton. That would clearly be a b'di'evet, because now you're creating a hefsek between the bracha and the eating. Certainly we don't want you to do that. So the Chavetz Chaim is saying, if the Mechaber says that you shouldn't break the bread and eat it before you have melach or lifton, then it goes without saying that you should wait to make the bracha until you have the melach or the lifton. V'im birech, but what if you did make the bracha? I've seen this happen. Somebody makes the bracha, Mitzi Lechem in the Aretz, and then he looks around and he sees there's no salt on the table. If you did make the bracha, says the Mishnah Berurah, tzarich lahamtin ktsas milechol, you have to wait a little bit, ad sheyaviu hamelech. You have to wait a little bit. He brings this down in the Sharit Tzion, nice cut Yud Ches. He brings this down from the Pri Megadim. He says it would be proper if you made the bracha and you don't have melach or lifton, you should wait a little bit for them to bring you the melach or the lifton. Now, we're going to have to see how much this is really negea to us nowadays. We're going to see by the time we finish this topic that this is usually not very negea to us nowadays, because strictly speaking, we don't really need either melach or lifton. We'll get to that momentarily. The words of the Mechaber were, you shouldn't break the bread until they bring melach or lifton lifanov, before you, before him. Okay, points out the Mishnah Berurah, v'im rabim hamesubim, if there are a lot of people who are going to be eating, tzarich lahamtin milavarech, you have to wait to make the bracha, ad sheyaviu lifnei kol echad ve'echad, until they bring melach or lifton for everybody. Because, let's say you have a big suda, you have 20 people sitting around the table, and you're being mitzi everybody in the Birchas HaMotzi, well then, you're being mitzi them in the bracha, and then they're going to eat. Now, they also need melach or lifton. So it's very nice if somebody brought you, the Mavarech, they brought you melach or lifton, so you have melach or lifton to eat your challah with right away, but do they have it? They also have to have melach or lifton. So he's just pointing out, when the Mechaber says you have to wait until they put melach or lifton before you, it's not only before you, it's before you and all the others that have to eat their challah after you make the bracha. Because he is being mitzi everybody else in the bracha, and all of them have to eat right after they say amen to the bracha. They have to eat. Chavzayin melach oy lifton, you need salt or a lifton. Now finally we find out why. Says the Chavetz Chaim. Now, personally, I found the beginning of this ice cotton to be worded a little bit awkwardly, but I'll tell you what I believe it means, and I think I'm right. I hope I'm right. The Mishnah Berurah says like this. The Mechaber says you need melach or lifton. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why? I'll tell you why you need melach or lifton. Kidei shetehei ne'echeles betam mishum kavod habracha. He brings down over here from the Graz that the reason why you need melach or lifton is because of this piece of challah that you're going to eat right after you make the bracha. That is the prusas habetzia. This is the most chashuv a piece. This is the piece that you made the bracha on. You made the Birchas HaMotzi, now you're eating it. This is considered a very chashuv a piece. And l'chvoid the bracha, we want it to be matim. We want it to be tasty. Kedei shetei ne'acheles betam mishum kavod habracha. Okay, so that's reason number one. So somebody asks you, why do you need salt? Oh, you need salt so that the piece of challah that you can eat for the bracha should be extra matim l'chvayid bracha. Now says the Mishnah Berurah, va'oid. And there's another reason. What's the other reason? Kidei shelo yitztarech achakak lahafsik bein bracha la'achila, because we're afraid that if you don't have melach or lifton, you're going to end up making a hefsik between the bracha and the eating. Lavakish melach v'tavlin, because you're going to be searching for salt or spices to eat with your challah, or for the onion dip or the garlic dip. Da'aser lechatchila. And lechatchila, it's certainly not appropriate to be mafsik between the bracha and the eating. Now, when I say that this, I found this to be worded a little bit awkwardly. The Chavetz Chaim seems to be telling me, he uses the word va'oid. Va'oid means there's another reason. I told you one reason why you need melach or lifton, and that is because you need to eat the pesias habetzia. You need to eat the piece that you make the bracha on. L'chvayid bracha, it has to be matim. So that was one reason. Now, va'oid, there's a second reason. What's the second reason? Well, if you don't have melach or lifton, then you're going to make the bracha. You're going to see that you don't have melach or lifton, and you're going to have to say, no, salt, and you're creating a hefsek between the bracha and the eating. Now, the Mishnah Berurah uses the word that lechatchila, that's a problem. Yeah, it's only a problem lechatchila, but the evidence is not a problem, because asking for the salt is considered tzarchei hasuda. So it really doesn't make a hefsek. But lechatchila, we don't want you to have any hefsek, not even waiting. Not even shehiyah silently, we don't want, right? We don't want any hefsek between the bracha and the eating. So certainly, if we can avoid it, we don't want you to say, no, salt. So, memela, you should have salt there before you start eating, before you make the bracha. Yeah, but why is this a va'oid? Why do you need salt? You only need salt, right? You only need salt because you have to eat the prusas habetzia. It has to be matim. So you need salt. That's the only reason you need salt, right? So why are you afraid that the guy's going to make a hefsek when he sees that he doesn't have salt? Why is this a va'oid? L'chayr, it's one and the same. Since Chazal said that you need salt, so the prusas habetzia should be matim. So now, if you make the bracha and you see you don't have salt, you're going to say no salt, and you're going to be mafsik. But if you take away the first reason, if you take away the need for the salt, and you say, nah, you don't need salt, l'chvayid bracha. Let's imagine that no one ever said such a thing, that you need salt, l'chvayid bracha. So then why should we be chayshid that you're going to say no salt and be mafsik? So why is it a va'oid, right? The second reason seems to be dependent on the first reason. But I think the answer is that it's taka two different reasons. The first reason is a requirement why you need salt or lifton. You need melach or lifton because we don't care what your tastes are. We don't care, maybe you don't mind plain tasteless bread. Maybe you even like it, right? But no, we're telling you that l'chvayid bracha you need melach or lifton. So we've established one reason why you need melach or lifton, because the prusas habetzia should be eaten with melach or lifton l'chvayid bracha. Now there's a second reason. You know what the second reason is? Forget the first reason. Let's say we never said that you have to eat the prusas habetzia with melach or lifton. But the bottom line is that's the way people usually eat challah. People usually eat challah with something lalafais by a sapas. People don't generally sit around and just eat plain bread. People eat bread. If they're having a milchik meal, they put on butter, they put on cream cheese. They're having a fleischik meal or a parv meal. They have onion dip, they have garlic, they have mayonnaise, chrayonnaise, whatever it is. There's 150 things people put on their challah. But they usually don't just eat dry bread. Memela, we have another concern if you don't have melach or lifton in front of you, and that is that stamazoi. You're going to want melach or lifton. And since you want melach or lifton, you're going to end up saying, oh, pass the salt. And we don't want you to say pass the salt, lechatchila, because lechatchila we consider that to be a hefsek. Okay, weiter. Says the Chavetz Chaim, continuing here in Ois Kot L'Chav Zayin, even if you're going to have to wait a little bit until they bring you the melach or the lifton, gam kein nochain lahamtin milavarech, it would be proper to wait to make the HaMotzi until somebody brings salt. Now, you might ask me, well, yeah, what's the big deal to wait? The big deal to wait is, remember what we learned at the end of Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, tekef linetila seuda. We don't really want to have any unnecessary hefsek between the Netilas Yadayim and the HaMotzi lechem in the Aretz. But says the Mishnah Berurah, if you have to wait for them to bring melach or lifton, even if you have to wait a little bit, that's fine, wait. Okay, now, before we finish this Ois Katan Chav Zayin, we have to actually dive back into the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch said, if I read from the beginning of Sif Hey, the Mechaber said, Lo yivtza ad sheyavi lefanav melach lifton, Pirush Rashi, what's lifton, kol davar adecha lamapas, lalafes by prusas habetzia, in order to accompany the piece that you're making the bracha on, the prusas habetzia. Now, says the Mechaber, ve'imihi nikia, but if you're eating pas nikia, pas noki. Now, we're used to thinking of pas nikia, meaning bread that was made out of fine flour. It was made out of solus, meaning it was made out of real white flour, where you filtered out all of what everybody nowadays considers very healthy. You got rid of all the chaff and all the bran and everything else, and you have real fine white flour. That's what we usually call pasnuki. That's not what pasnuki means over here. The Mishnah Berurah says that over here, pasnuki means bread that was made out of wheat flour. Wheat flour is called pasnuki. That's a finer type of flour than, let's say, barley flour or spelt flour, even though spelt flour is much sought after nowadays, by the gluten-free crowd or whatever it is. So they pay more for it. But Chazal didn't consider it so choshev. So, says the Mechaber, imi nikia, if the pasta you're eating is choshev, if it's pasnuki, it's wheat bread, oy shehi mitubelas betavlin, or it is spiced with spices, oy bemelach, or it contains salt, kein shalonu, says the Mechaber, like our bread, and dare I say nowadays, like our bread. All of our bread has salt in it. A lot of our bread, especially the challah that you eat on Shabbos, it has sugar in it. Sugar is an example of tavlin. And nowadays, you could get everything challah, chocolate chip challah, marshmallow challah, double everything together with nothing and something and everything else. So now you have all types of challahs and all types of breads. So that's what the Mechaber is talking about here. The Mechaber says if you're eating bread that's mitubelas betavlin, that's spiced, so it is matim, oy b'melach, or it already has salt in it, ke'ed shalonu, like our bread, oy, or another case, sheniskave lechol pas chareva, a person sat down to a meal, and he bedafka wants very plain bread, right? Sometimes you like to sit down and eat a piece of super plain melba toast, unflavored, not the garlic or the everything, or just plain old. It's very, very super plain. It has nothing. No spicy, no flavoring, maybe even no salt. I'm not saying melba toast doesn't have salt. I don't have it in front of me right now. But you can imagine such a thing. A person just wants mamish plain bread. Pesach tikka matzah, flour and water. There's nothing else in there. Flour and water. I like matzah. I like Pesach tikka matzah. So a person wants to eat pas chareva. In that case, einay tzarich lahamtin. Then he doesn't have to wait for melach or lifton. Now the explanation of this is very simple. The Mechaber gave us two cases over here. In the first case, where you have challah that already has salt in it, or it has other flavorings in it, so you don't have to wait for melach or lifton, because the melach or the lifton is already built in. And the two reasonings that we had in the Mishnah Berurah why it's important to have the melach or the lifton don't apply. As far as it being matim l'chvayt bracha, it already is matim. As far as we're afraid that you're going to be mafsik and you're going to ask for melach or lifton, you don't have to ask for melach or lifton. The melach or lifton is already built in. So we're not afraid that you're going to be mafsik, and we don't need it l'chvayt bracha. In the second case of the Mechaber, where you were niskavein lechol pas chareva, you bedafka sat down to eat something plain. In that case, explains the Mefarshim, you don't need salt lichvaid the bracha. You know why? The main reason you need salt lichvaid a bracha is because what the Chazal were afraid of is the following. You're going to sit down, you're going to make HaMotzi, and now you're going to eat the Birchas HaMotzi. You're going to eat that piece plainer than all the rest of the challah that you're going to eat the rest of the meal. The rest of the meal, you're going to take your challah and you're going to put on onion dip. You're going to take your challah, you're going to make a sandwich with cream cheese and lox. So for the rest of the meal, you're going to make your bread very choshev because you're going to use various types of lifton. But for the first piece, when you make the HaMotzi, that you're going to eat plain. So now you're actually denigrating the Birchas HaMotzi. The Birchas HaMotzi is going to be plainer than any of the rest of the challah that you eat for the rest of the meal. That Chazal couldn't be sovel. So what Chazal said was you need melech or lifton for the Birchas HaMotzi. But if you're sitting down to a Suda where your whole intent is to eat pas chareva, you're not planning on using any lifton. You're not planning on putting anything on your bread. So then we don't have to worry that the Birchas HaMotzi is going to be worse than the rest of the bread. It's not. It's going to be the same. And that we're okay with. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah. So we have to finish off the last few words of Mishnah Berurah, Ois Kat Zayin. Umashe Kosav Nikia, when the Mechaber writes that if you're eating pas Nikia, then you don't need melech or lifton. He means kigon pas chitim ukai gavda. He means good quality bread, wheat bread. Ois Kat Chavches pas chareva. If you're eating pas chareva, you don't need melech or lifton. De'ein bazem mishum kvay bracha. Because we don't have to worry about kavod bracha. Hoil de'ein daita lecha klal b'suda zu melech v'tavlin. Because during this suda, you don't intend on eating any of the other bread with melech or tavlin. So then we're not worried about the Birchas HaMotzi. V'gam l'tam hasheni, and as far as the second reason, the va'oid, that you might be mafsik between the HaMotzi and the eating to ask for melech v'tavlin, v'gam l'tam hasheni mishum hefsek gam ki lo shayach bazeh. It also doesn't apply here. Because you're not planning on using melech or tavlin at all. So we're not afraid that you're going to be mafsik by asking for it. In that case, now, the words of the Mechaber, as always, are very meduyik. The words of the Mechaber were that in these cases, einoi tzarich lahamtin. You're not required to wait for melech v'tavlin. Oh, the Chavetz Chaim picks up on that. Says the Chavetz Chaim over here in Ois Chavtes, nevertheless, im roitze lahamtin kaidem abracha. If you want to wait before you make the HaMotzi, achi yavilu fun of melech v'tavlin, until they bring salt or tavlin, even in these cases, even if you're eating our bread, our challah, that already has salt, you're having an everything bagel, and you want to wait until somebody brings salt, until you make the HaMotzi, harishos biyadai, you can. Ve'ein lachish lehafsik bein netila lahamoitzi, and you don't have to worry about tekef l'netila suda, kevichu tzarich suda, because the melech and the tavlin is considered tzarich suda. Now, why would you do this? Why would you wait for the melech v'tavlin if you don't need it? Well, we're going to see that the Ramah is going to say that even with our bread that already has salt and everything else, there's still an inyan to have salt on the table. Maybe there's even still an inyan to use the salt for the challah. But to have salt on the table, there's definitely still an inyan. So now, let's actually see that in the Ramah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 lines up from the bottom near the end of the line in the Shulchan Aruch Hagah. Says the Ramah. Umikamakin. Nevertheless, even though we just said that our bread has salt, so you don't need melech v'tavlin, mikar adin, says the Ramah, mikamakim, nevertheless, mitzvah lahaniach al kol shulchan melach kaidim sheyivtza. There's a mitzvah to have salt on the table, no matter what kind of challah or bread you're eating. There's a mitzvah to have salt on the table. Doesn't say anything about using it. The Ramah says mitzvah lahaniach al kol shulchan melech. It's a mitzvah to put salt on the table, kaidim sheyivtza, before you make the bracha and break the bread. Why? Because the table is like the mizbeach in the Beis HaMikdash. V'ha'achila kikarbon. And when you eat on the table, the food that you're eating is like the carbon. V'nemar, and it says in the pasuk by the karbonos, al kol karboncha takriv melach, that you were required to bring salt with all of your karbonos. All of the karbonos had to be salted. So salt always went up on the mizbeach together with the emurin, with the parts of the carbon that were going to be burnt. Salt always went up onto the mizbeach together with the carbon. So therefore, since your shulchan is like a mizbeach and the food is like the karbonos, you need salt on the table. And says the Ramah, v'hu magein mina piranus, and this salt protects from piranhas. This salt that you have on the table protects from punishment. He brings this down from Taisvis in Birchas HaMotzi Aleph, and he says finally, v'ayin lekamon soif siman kuf ayin. So very fascinating. The Ramah, the Mechaber told me originally that you should not break the bread, and therefore, like the Mishnah Berurah said, you shouldn't make the Birchas HaMotzi until you have melach or lifton, until you have either salt or some other type of lifton, some other type of accompaniment for the bread. And we saw the reasons for that. Then the Mechaber said, however, our bread already has salt, our bread already has tavlin, it has sugar, etc., etc. Therefore, strictly speaking, we don't really need salt. Says the Ramah, even though strictly speaking we don't need salt, there's still a mitzvah to have salt on the table. Why is there a mitzvah to have salt on the table? Because al kol karboncha takriv melach, your table is a mizbeach, your food is karbonos, and therefore you have to have salt. Okay? Says the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton limud. Your table is daimel mizbeach. How is a table similar to the mizbeach? K'moshe amru Chazal. This is based on what Chazal say. Brachas den Amud Aleph. Bizman shebeis hamikdash kayam. In the days when we had the Beis Hamikdash, Beheira Yibana Hamikdash, Kayam HaMizbeach, no, Shebeis Hamikdash Kayam, HaMizbeach Mechaper Al Ha'odam. The Mizbeach would gain forgiveness for somebody, right? Somebody did an Avera. How did he get Slicha v'Kapara? He did Tshuva, he brought a carbon. So the carbon brought Kapara. Akshav, now when we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, Shulchanoi Shel Adam. It is a person's table. And in the brackets, the Chavetz Chaim says, "Shenoisein milachmai ladal." You give from your food to an ani. You share your food with an impoverished person. So then your table, your shulchan mechaper alav, brings you kapara. Tiksiv, this is in line with the pasuk in Yecheskel that says, "Vayedaber elai zeh hashulchan asher lifnei Hashem." A shulchan could be referred to as lifnei Hashem, like the mizbeach. So the Mishnah Berurah is telling us, you know why your shulchan is daimed to a mizbeach? Because the mizbeach brought kapara, your shulchan brings kapara. How does your shulchan bring kapara? Because you share the food of your table with aniyim. What if you don't really share the food of your table with aniyim? Yeah, you give tzedakah, you give money, but you don't share the food of your table with aniyim. So take a look at the Shar Tziyah, Chav Hei, where the Chavetz Chaim says, V'gam al yidei amiras divrei Torah alav. If you speak divrei Torah by your table, that also brings you kapara, k'di'isa ba'avos perek gimel. Interesting. He also says, Olapachos, at least, yoymar eze mizmar. You should at least say, Epis Kapitel Tilim, Aka Birchas HaMotzi, after you make the HaMotzi, eat the challah, you should at least say a mizmar. If you remember, we learned earlier about saying Perek Chav Gimel Tehillim, Mizmor David Hashem Roi Lo Yechsar, by the table. Maybe he's referring to that as well. Okay, now we go to Mishnah Berurah's Katan Lamed Aleph. So the Shulchan is the Mizbeach, and the Achila, the food, is the carbon. Says the Mishnah Berurah, how is your food akin to a carbon? What elevates your food to the level of a carbon? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Sha'adam oichel lechazik kaychaisav. Person should eat l'shem shamayim to strengthen himself and to give himself kayach. Val yidei zeh yeh so that he should be healthy, v'chazak and strong, la'avodas Hashem, for avodas shamayim, for avodas Hashem. If you do that, then you're eating. It's taki eating from a carbon. Ois Katan Lamed Beis, the Ramah said that therefore we have to have salt, and the salt is megin min haperonius. The salt protects us from punishment. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Isa Medrash, we have a Medrash that says, Kishe Yisrael Yoishvin, when Yidden are sitting around the table, Umamtinin zeh ezeh, and they're waiting for each other, Ad sheyitlu yedeihem, until everybody finishes washing the tilas yadayim. Veheim b'loy mitzvahs, and in the meantime, they're not being mekayim any mitzvahs. Everybody's sitting around the table twiddling their thumbs, right? You can't speak, can't say divrei Torah, because tekef l'tilas seuda, so you're not going to be mafsik, so your mamish yoshev a bottle, and you're free from mitzvahs. You're not being mekayim any mitzvahs right now. Oh, when that happens, comes along the Satan. Says the Mishnah Berurah, lost the place here. Guess what happens? Hasatan mekatreg aleihem. The Satan comes and is mekatreg on Klal Yisrael. Look, they're sitting around being yoshev a bottle, not doing anything. Ubris melach magen aleihem. Bris krusa al hamelach. There's such a thing that the pasuk refers to as bris melach olam. There's a bris melach, a covenant of salt, and that bris melach protects us from the Satan. What's the bris melach? Harbe kolmasa nishbru al zeh. There's many pens have been broken and drained, writing about precisely what the bris melach is. But melach, salt, is a preservative. They used to use salt. I always get a kick out of saying, especially for us Yidden that are very, very fond of corned beef sandwiches. Why is corned beef called corned beef? What exactly does corned beef have to do with corn? The answer is nothing. The term corned beef has absolutely nothing to do with corn. The etymology of the word of corned beef is thus: we refer to a crystal of salt as a grain of salt. Now, newsflash: salt is not a grain. Wheat is a grain. Rye is a grain. Salt is not a grain. It either comes from sea salt or it's mined, but it certainly isn't a grain. Yet here in America, we refer to a kernel of salt as a grain of salt. I guess it's similar to grain. A kernel of wheat is called grain, so a kernel of salt, we call it a grain of salt. Not so in England. In England, and certainly back in the day in England, a grain of salt was called a corn of salt. Not a grain of salt, a corn of salt. Corned beef was salt beef. That was the original preserved meat other than smoked meat. The British Navy lived on salt beef. They also sometimes died on salt beef because it wasn't well preserved and they got food poisoning. But the merchant navy, they subsisted on salt beef. They took meat, they dried it and preserved it in salt in refrigeration, and that's what they ate for 6 months out at sea. So corned beef is really salt beef. So salt is a preservative. It makes things last for a long time. You know what makes Klal Yisrael last? And unfortunately nowadays, right, seeing what Klal Yisrael is going through around the world, not just in Israel, seeing what Klal Yisrael is going through, we talk, what makes us last? What makes us last is that we are preserved. What's the preservative? We sing about it the Seder night on Pesach. V'hi sha'amda, la'avoseinu v'lanu. It stood for us. What's the v'hi? There's a lot of pshatim in that v'hi. But one of the most common pshatim in the v'hi is the Torah HaKdosha. The Torah HaKdosha, v'hi sha'amda la'avoseinu. The Torah HaKdosha is what preserves us. Also, it's the bris with the Rebbeinu Shalom. V'hi sha'amda la'avoseinu, the bris ben absarim, the bris that the Rebbeinu Shalom made with the avos, that preserves us. So the bris melach, it's like a bris of salt. Salt is a preservative. The Rabbeinu Shalom's bris with us, the Rabbeinu Shalom's Torah Kedosha that he gave us, that preserves us. That's the bris melach olam, and that bris, the bris melach, is what protects us from the Satan when we're sitting by the table, and that's why we need to have salt by the table. Finally, Ais Kat Lamed Gimel, the Mishnah Berurah, if you look at the Ramah left off with a Maramokim. He was talking about salt, and he told us to take a look ahead at Siman Kuf Ayin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why is the Ramah sending us to Siman Kuf Ayin, where we're having a discussion about salt? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Pirush Af Agav de Mavur Sham. Even though the Ramah spells out in Siman Kuf Ayin, Dila Didan de Pasha Laduhu Bemelach, that for us, since our bread contains salt, that's why we're not makbid like they used to be to eat something salty after the Suda. Still in all, even though technically we don't need salt at the beginning of the Suda, because we don't need it for the Prusas Habetzia, because it's already built into our bread. And we don't really need salt at the end of the Suda, because it's already built into our bread. Still in all, there's a mitzvah to have it on the table. Now, finally, the Chavetz Chaim is going to answer the following question. So fine, technically speaking, we don't need salt. But, the Ramah said, we should have the salt on the table anyway. Okay, so we have the salt on the table. Is there a mitzvah to use the salt anyway? Should we still dip the challah into the salt when we give it out by HaMotzi? Or is it enough just to have it on the table? Says the Mishnah Berurah, the Kasva HaMikubalim, he brings this down for the Magen Avram, that Al Pi Taras Nistar, the Mikubalim write, lit by Prusas HaMotzi, to dunk the piece of HaMotzi, Bemelach, in salt, Shalosh Pa'amim, 3 times. Okay? We're going to stop over here. Birchas Hashem, next time we'll pick up with Sivav. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be Megan on God's Klal Yisrael. The Baruch should send Yeshua's Refuas Parnasset Shidduchim to all those in need. Hachenu kol beis Yisrael hanesunim batzara ubashivya ha'imnim bein bayam ubein bayabasha hamakayim yirachem aleihem v'yetziei mitzara l'rvacha me'afela la'oira ubishibad l'geula hashta b'agala uvizman kariv v'neimar amen. Be well.